Vijay. It's very nice hosting you to the second edition of the Maintenance Analytics Summit here in Stockholm. Thanks for conducting this interview with us. Before we go on, can you please introduce yourself a bit more about your background, expertise?
Sure. Well, I should say I've been one of those guys who've been lucky enough to be at the forefront of some of the newest technologies that the world has thrown at us in the last 15 to 20 years. So started off my career pretty much on the technology as architects on telecommunication systems and around prepaid rating and charging, billing, things that were probably top-notch at some point of time, but then moved into what was then called as machine-to-machine, and then from there into Internet of Things, and then digital. So having kind of at the forefront, driving technology and business across all of these different areas. And more recently, I would say in the last 10 odd years, I've been responsible for building organizations and businesses, delivering digital both within the organization and to the customers of those organizations. So that's been pretty much my journey. So it's not been core technical, as I like to call myself. I've always been on the other side of the yellow line when you see a factory, but then it's about working with everyone on the inner side of the factory to help transform their businesses digitally.
But that is the point of success. You have to connect all the dots so to deliver the final product.
Yeah, absolutely.
Vijay, according to McKinsey, predictive maintenance is lately, but let's say still a very hot topic when it comes to asset-heavy industries. According to McKinsey, it will help companies save millions, more than 600 millions by 2025. And according to the same report, most of the data will come from the IoT and IoT technology, which is gathering more and more data. This is one side of it. The other part states in the report that factories are lacking in catching up with this, because one thing is to collect the data to have, and the other thing is to have the analytical capabilities to take it further, to make the most out of it. We want to hear your comments on this, please, as a person engaged in this process.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I actually say that's been a moving target, the numbers I keep hearing. So it's good that I hear the latest number now. But then it's always been a moving target, both the numbers and the year when we are probably going to achieve that. And I've been hearing that for the last 15 years. But the true problem or the true challenge that we face as an industry, I think, is a gap between the concept of data and treating analytics as a technology versus really the understanding of the true value which comes out of this data. So as soon as we talk about analytics and data, we really talk about IoT. We bring in all of these different sources of data and information into it. What we lose is the aspect or the fact around, hey, how could I actually use all of this data to create true value? So rather than taking a bottom-up approach, thinking about source and data, I think we would have much better successes if we started from the top, saying, hey, what is the kind of value that I really want to create for these operators that you talk about, the technical operator or the person who's sitting there in the factory doesn't really bother about data. What he's looking at is, hey, I have this, I'm taking my own industry. I'm actually part of the metal cutting industry. So I have a tool and I have an insert. Hey, my tools keep breaking 10 times a day. How can I actually reduce that from 10 times a day to probably 5 times a day? He doesn't really care about the bits and bytes of data which is out there or the sensor sending some information back. Yes, guys, can you tell me how to do that? So it's a value. So I think the mismatch between what I'll be talking about that in my presentation too, what the producers of analytics would like to produce versus what the consumers of the value are really expecting. And I think there's a big gap between these two. And that's essentially what is kind of I should say, creating the lag or the moving target in terms of the returns that we can actually get off what we call as analytics. And it's a journey, and it's gone through a lot of, I should say, cycles, and probably we are at a cycle now, the journey as an industry where we have started thinking of analytics more as business value than as technology.
But I think it's related to the next questions. You mentioned the gap between the two groups? Are customers really ready for predictive maintenance?
Okay, that takes me back to the phrasing again, right? I said, what do we really mean by predictive maintenance or predictive analytics, right?
Mm-hmm.
When I have been in the services industry, at some point of time, I was in the software services, and I used to talk about descriptive, diagnostic, predictive, prescriptive, great jargons to use, right? But when you say predictive, and when the guy, the operator who's standing there in the factory says predictive, there's a lot of difference between these two. What is probably a descriptive for an analyst or a data analyst is actually predictive for the guy, the operator who is actually standing there, because they are in a completely different world, and they are in a world of actually realizing something and applying their knowledge into it, whereas we think of analytics as something which is completely autonomous and can do what it is supposed to do by itself. So if you ask me, predictive maintenance is a long way to go. We should really be very clear about creating business values through descriptive and diagnostics, and take the first steps and help the organizations realize that it is not about data, it is about the value that you're really getting out of this, and then slowly mature this into what we would want to call as predictive and prescriptive.
So you're talking about a shifting of a focus, actually.
And talking the same language.
Okay, so how do you involve and change the mindset of this team of technicians actually to migrate from this corrective to the predictive maintenance, considering in most cases that they are not used to work with high amounts of data?
If you go to a pretty, I should say, traditional industry, let's take a traditional or an automotive or a aeronautical kind of an industry, they actually do predictive, but they don't do predictive based on data and data analysis and data analytics, right? So if you were to actually go to this technician and say, hey, how can we help you moving from corrective to predictive? He says, I already am doing predictive because I have everything out here. I know exactly how, when I hear this vibration, when the sound is a little different, I know something is going wrong inside. I can predict that there is going to be a tool breakage. I stop it and I make the correction so that I can do it better. What we are really talking about analytics is how do we make it autonomous, simpler, leverage data, and be able to do what that expert or the experienced guy is actually doing there, listening to the sound, the vibrations, etc. So I think it's not a question of how do we make them move from corrective to predictive. It's about how do we actually talk the same language as them and help them understand why it is much more better to probably leverage data and be more accurate and probably much better quality in terms of what we want to do with the data than using my way of doing a predictive correction to what I'm doing.
I get it. So, and then how do you ensure that in order to achieve that right value in the end, how do you ensure that you have captured just the right data in the first place? This has been a challenge and a question raising up many times in our summit.
It's pretty coincidence. I was actually sitting with a PhD student yesterday who was actually working in this area. She's from Yale University. Yesterday, in fact. And she asked me the same question, and I repeat the answer, right? There is never going to be a correct data. When it comes to insights, the reality of insights today and the value that you get from the data today is going to be very different from the needs that you have tomorrow or 3 months down the line or 8 months down the line or a year down the line. And that's why I say it's not about technology and it's not about data source and it's not about data. It's about the business value. When you start thinking business value, your data and the sources of these different kinds of data and what that data needs to be becomes a by the way to satisfy what is here. So if it is about a specific tool breakage, I'm just taking some examples here. I know these are the kind of data that I need to collect. It's never going to be a right data. When the expectations become from tool breakage to tool life management, I want to extend the life of the tools, excuse me. Then the kind of data and the sources of information will probably be much different from what you have today. So it's never a question of what is the right data. It's about what is your business going to demand, what is your value going to demand, and do you have the right kind of a value system? both from technology, partnerships, sources of data, etc., to be able to get the right kind of information to be able to satisfy that. So today's right data is wrong for tomorrow. Tomorrow's data might be wrong for day after tomorrow. And that's the world that we live in when we talk about analytics.
I think you perfectly concluded this interview, Vijay. Thank you very much. It was truly a pleasure. And thanks
Same
for
here,
being
Samantha.
part of the summit.
Thank you very much.